Hey, it's Les from the TV Dudes. This week, I'm thrilled to chat with Orlando Bishop. Orlando's worked on a variety of projects, such as the Jamie Kennedy Experiment, The Parkers, The Twilight Zone, and was a staff writer on the WB's Seventh Heaven. His new one-man play, Unstuck as Fuck, is the irreverent, insightful, and inspirational story of how Orlando got out of Flatbush, Brooklyn, all the way to Yale University, and then on to a life writing, directing, and coaching. Unstuck as Fuck is currently streaming via StudioWorks, an online theater series that brings innovative productions to at-home audiences, which just launched this fall from the studios of Key West, one of Florida's leading multidisciplinary arts and culture organizations. We'll include the link below so that you can check out the play, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Orlando.
Hi, Les. How are you?
Doing well. How are you? I just finished rewatching the special or the play. So, of course, I had to take a lap around the building with both fists in the air.
Wait, you said you had to take a lap around the building?
Yeah, yelling, I will. My cat's looking at me weird. There's no way to not be pumped after that. You know, people had to be looking crazy coming out of the theater.
Yeah, it gets folks pretty riled up. Yeah.
I love the focus of Unstuck as Fuck of the play itself.
Well, thanks.
How do you term it in terms of a project? I've heard you call, or I've seen in the literature you called it somewhere between Tony Robbins and Richard Pryor, and I feel like that's pretty apt. Yeah. Do you consider it a one-man show? Is it a motivational speech you get? How do you think of it in your head?
I do think of it as a solo show, sort of in its bare, sort of fundamental form, and that's something I've done in the past. So there's definitely that influence there. I would also say that I think of it very much the way I think about our podcast Unstuck AF, which is as a pregame speech for your life. Yeah. And I've thought that more than, that's really sort of been a guiding principle to me when I'm making choices as to how to present certain things. So I definitely see it as a solo show and a piece of theater. And Anika Larson, who directed the piece, was amazing in a number of ways. But one of the ways that she really, I thought, helped me to bring this to life the way I wanted it to be brought to life was to keep reminding me of some of the keys of what's special about theater and being in the live space with people and all those sorts of things. So it's even more of a theater piece now than it was originally in my mind. I think I had it much more of as a mix of theater / TED Talk kind of a deal. And I think there's still some elements of that, but yeah, it's definitely a solo show.
I feel like there's always challenges to taking your own story and winnowing it down, not just to good anecdotes to tell, but then selecting out of those anecdotes towards a central theme. It's not as simple. It's not a Tristan Shandy story. I didn't get your entire life. It has to aim at something, but then you've got a separate track of having to make visual stage choices, the direction, the blocking, when to use props, when to not. And then I would assume the additional element of the occasional screen overlays or the times that you cut to the background shots, the things that I would think Anika probably brought to the process. Can you talk a little bit about knowing what you want to do here, knowing that you want to pregame people? It's almost a call to action at the end of go out there and kick its ass, do it,
and make it happen.
Stop, don't be scared, do it. And I love that message. Can you talk a little bit about picking through your own life and ways that you've maybe unconsciously workshopped this in every conversation since your 20s, probably, and getting it to this very focused hour 18.
I appreciate the word focused, and I think one thing that I would sort of process-wise highlight is how important editing is, and you're right. This has really been worked on over many years, even telling some of those stories just in life when I've been sharing them. And Anika, again, I have to give credit to, just masterful at figuring out what doesn't need to be there. And I'll feel like, oh, well, they're not going to understand this story without that, and so on. So that was definitely part of it, is having someone else to bounce it off of, to have a real sense there. But in the broader sense of how these stories came together, what really hit me was that there really did emerge a pattern in some key moments of how I personally got unstuck. And I think that did help me to think about, okay, how do I now transfer those learnings? Mm-hmm. And I think some of my work as a teacher and even as a sports coach served me, because I often do the same thing there, right? Oh, I want to stress teamwork. Okay, so how do I work backward to what the chant might be, or what the practice activity might be, or the drill or whatever that's gonna bring that out. So that was a piece of it. Beyond that, and this is outside of the world of the show now, but I found out on September 6th, 2021, which I always joke is a totally nondescript date that no one will remember. I was diagnosed with ADHD. And so interestingly, and this sort of allowed me in some ways to look back on what we'd already written and worked on, some of these pieces that in these stories that I experienced are very much reflective of that, and my not having known, that was what was at play. And so in some ways, I feel like I was picking up on a pattern in my own life. And what's been amazing to me is, yes, I see that now, but I also see how that pattern persists for people in other places. It may show up differently or in different degrees when it does, and that kind of thing. But just that need to reconnect to oneself, to other people, to really get clear on the experience you want to be having. And I love what you said, like, that final message of it being, don't be scared, get out there. And I guess I would add to that, if you're scared, get out there, right? Like that, like the courage piece. And I very much enjoy sharing that. One other thing I guess I would add on that front as a coach is I realized I discovered that this is a job as an adult, but I've been doing versions of this show in my life for people around me, and I guess on some level for myself, for a very long time. And so I can think of times back into my childhood where some friend of mine was working on X, Y, or Z, and I was the one who was thinking like, oh well, if we do this, or if we practice that, or come on, you can do it. So I just think this has always been. I've really always enjoyed helping other people do a great job. Yeah. And I just always have. Yeah.
I think particularly in the television industry in the last few years, we seem to only hear the stories of just the worst possible managers.
Right.
And, the worst person to run a room or whatever. And I think back to writers I've talked to who've told me about, like the kind of coaching tree chain back to like a really good showrunner that they'd worked under. Mm-hmm. And like, no, you can, I know if I work with the people that worked under so-and-so, they're going to be good.
Right.
And that, how much impact you really can have, even if day to day you don't feel it, by being like that. And yeah, I imagine you've probably always been that friend. One of the things that I loved about the show was this message of, letting go of that guilt or frustration or being mad at yourself for not being far enough along. I'm 44. Right. And I just directed my first short film that I kickstarted.
Oh, congratulations!
and it would have been, thank you, and it would have been it would be a huge waste of time for me to sit around and just be mad at myself for not having done this at 34 or 24. I knew me then, and we couldn't have done it.
Right.
And that's fine.
Right.
That
Yeah.
it's both a totally valid emotion that I feel like, or feeling that people get in that I understand, but it's also it just is killing time that you don't really have. And
yeah.
It's going to add to more. If you're going to do that, you're just adding to that story by killing more time. And I loved that focus in Unstuck about letting go of that. Well, I should have done this or that, and this game is the game. This is the only game.
Right. Right. Well, again, thanks. And it's so funny, and I'm glad you point out that piece, right? We get, I just turned 50, in this past July, and those milestone birthdays. I think it's very natural to take some inventory and so on. And I know exactly that thing that you're describing, and I talk about in the show of, if I had only done this 20 years ago, if I had known that. And one of the things that's really hitting me more and more, even since having performed the show in Key West and really, having launched this real, fully realized version of it, is, as you point out, yeah, but I really couldn't have, right? I mean, I think, let's say I could time travel and just hand this script to 30-year-old Orlando. Well, he's just a different guy, right? I mean, he hasn't been through some of the things I've been through. He hasn't, sat in a NICU, trying to give a pep talk to, his week-old son, saying, come on, man, we want to go home, let's go. And so it would be a different show. It would be a different experience for me. It'd be a different experience for the audience. The other piece, and I love that you talked about you just adding to that story, is once you're fighting through all those things, I think part of what happens is it's truly like this awful cycle of feeling bad, having to fight through the feeling bad to even getting to, right, putting up the Kickstarter, let's say, to use your example. And then you've expended so much energy to just fight through all those bad feelings and then self-talk. And I found more and more that that was exhausting. Like, by the time I got to the proverbial square one, I was already kind of spent.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's happened in the last few years where I've really focused in this area of like, well, you know what? Didn't go that way. This is the way it's going now. Is it allows me to show up for the actual thing I'm doing now at, for you directing at 44, for me, doing the coaching and work I'm doing at 50, is I can at least show up with most of my energy intact and not feeling like I've already fought a battle just to get there.
Yeah. And honestly, when I look back at my 20s, that's what it looks like to me, is just this 10-year fight to get to the thing.
Right.
And yeah, looking back on it, like, wow, I wish I could have shook that kid, but I couldn't have. That's the 10 years it took to shake that off me.
That's right.
There's in terms of putting together the show and workshopping it back and forth and getting input, how do you? There's always a kill your darling point with any script where you've got a super clever bit of dialogue and it just makes it seem too long or whatever. And
right.
But when there's stories from your own life and they both feel emotionally important to you, maybe for different reasons than will land for the audience, were there any particularly difficult choices where maybe Anika had to go, look, you got to let that section go?
Yeah, there were a couple of things. One, and it was a sequence of 3 stories that were told, relatively quickly, but together they took up a little time. And as you said, you get to the point where it's like, well, Orlando, We got 90 minutes and stuff here, and we can't have a 90-minute show. And but it was three sort of anecdotes around people who used this approach successfully. My whole coaching approach and the whole Align methodology. They'd used it to achieve some things in their lives, and I sort of rattle them off back to back as I'm saying, this is what I do now. And it felt to me when I wrote it, and it felt to me even as we were going through the process, that you had to have that, right? You had to show that, like, no, I've done this and it's worked. And Anika, over time, funny enough, I didn't cut them all at once. She said, I think those have to go. And I said, well, let's keep the one to know, at least show. And what was right was that in hearing my stories and my story, and in experiencing what the audience was experiencing themselves, they didn't need that. They didn't need that sort of stamp of approval of like, well, here are, essentially dramatized testimonials. They didn't need that piece. So that was one. And then the other is a piece of my story when I was moving to LA. The short-ish version of it is I ended up with a wheel flying off my gifted car, and so the rest of the trip was a bit touch and go, and I got stuck in Richfield, Utah, and needing to figure out how to get out of there. And it's a story I've told on stage before, and people have really enjoyed. And it does sort of fit into the narrative I'm telling there. But again, as we told it, and this, if anybody's listening who does their own writing, I think this was an interesting piece. It did fit in the story in terms of me moving to LA, and that was the whole thing I was doing. But it didn't, and this was the true kill your darlings of it, in terms of the fact that you could pull it and nobody would miss it if they didn't know it was supposed to be there. And so I still love that story, and I still think it's it's a great, but it was truly, that came out at that point where it was not so much, do these things work, but what do we actually need to achieve what we're trying to achieve with the show. So that was probably the toughest of the cuts. Because I love telling that story, and I've gotten great feedback about it and all that. And also it's a bit of, crutch is probably a strong word. That's probably a little too much. But knowing I was going to be on stage for all that time, I'm a former stand-up comic. So, I've done stand-up. I may do it again one day. But, it's nice to know you've got a couple of bits in your back pocket that, like, well, if all else fails, I know that bit will hit.
Yeah, I can tell this bit.
Yeah, exactly. And so to pull one of those out of the show made it feel like a little bit more of a high wire act than it already was.
I think in the long view back, it's got to be kind of nice to basically have been told, hey man, you can stop selling. You don't really need to. Yeah. You don't really need to drive that home anymore. You got it.
Yeah. No, that's a great way to frame that. Yeah, it really was. And being able to work that way, and even as we start to work with the studios, Key West, and then talking to Stephen Katsakos, and he also was great about sharing. Like, I think that point's made, and helping me to refine it from there. It gave me a certain confidence about the performance, but also about the work itself, because as you can tell, I really mean it, right? I hope for anybody who sees it, and really anybody who I can reach and talk to about this stuff, that they can apply it and feel better and do better and have a better experience and impact other people. And seeing through them how we can get that message out, and then getting to see the audience response was truly, it was a life experience I won't soon forget.
Well, we're going to put the link in the notes here, and folks can go watch it for $10. If you're coming out of the pandemic in a funk for whatever end of the world related reasons, you will take a lap around the building with your fist in the air, Rocky style. There's just you'll be pumped. There's just not a way to not be. It's worth the $10 just to take a moment out of your week and flip your head around a little bit. Thank you so much for talking to me about it today.
Well, I appreciate being a guest, and I do hope people go check it out because it's there to help. It really is. So thanks so much, Les. I really appreciate this.
You have a great rest of your day. I'm sure you're going to impact a couple more people before you're done. When you say you're at your office, is that Align P? Is that where you're at?
Yeah, Align Performance LLC. So I essentially we built an office here in the back of the house. So but yeah, I'm here in Los Angeles, and this is where I work from. Yep.
That's great. Man, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Take care now.
You too. Bye. TV Dudes is an independently run podcast out of Austin, Texas. We are exclusively listener supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/TVDudes.
You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at TV Dudes. All the music for our show is done by our friend and original TV Dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith.
To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com. I'm Randy Lander.
I'm Les Weiler.
And I'm Kyle Scott.
Thanks for listening.